Welcome to the Independent School Podcast with me, Juliet Corbett. As an executive coach and strategy advisor, I guide senior leaders in the world of education to find their strategic focus, empower their teams, and regain control over their time, helping them to go from exhausted to strategic. On this podcast, I share the ideas and tips that I've developed over the years to help the leaders that I've worked with one-to-one, so that I can help you to focus on your priorities and achieve your goals with confidence and ease. And this week I am really excited to be joined by Paul Morgan, head of St. Julian's School in Lisbon, Portugal. Paul and I have a conversation to share with you which spans a whole host of topics which are going to be really useful for aspiring and current heads in UK and international schools. We talk about how a new head can lead a strategy development process when they're still really fresh in post, trying to balance the continuity and change that's required. How a head can structure the leadership team in a way that enables effective delegation of those strategic priorities. And really importantly, he also talks about how to find time for quality strategic thinking. We often talk about this in the abstract and recognise its importance, but Paul actually shares with us some really helpful time management tips about how he carves out time for quality strategic thought. Paul Morgan joined St. Julian's as head of school in August 2022. He studied mathematics at Kent University and then completed his PGCE at Cambridge University. He's had an extensive and distinguished international career, having started work at the London Oratory School for 14 years, after which he moved to St. Paul's School in Sao Paulo as the deputy head. In 2009, he obtained his National Professional Qualification for Headship, and in 2016, he took his first headship as principal of the British School of Amsterdam. Part of his accomplishments there was to lead the school through a €50 million building project. He's been a board member of COBIS as well. So we are in very safe hands as we talk about strategy in schools and particularly in an international school context. So without any further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Paul. So hello, Paul, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast. It's fantastic to have you with us here today.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Yeah, so I often start the conversations when people join me as a guest on the podcast talking about the root of their passion for education. One of the reasons that I love working in this sector is because everyone has a passion for the impact, the positive impact that education can have on young people and on society and the world at large. And it's really interesting to know what the root of that passion is. Do you have a sense of a particular experience or a sense of where that root of passion for education comes from for you, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. I went to a very small comprehensive school on the Welsh border, and at that school I had two phenomenal maths teachers that just stirred and it just captivated my mind. That mathematics just seemed like the most amazing subject, threading through everything. And that meant that I was then discussing it with lots of other people, sort of my peers. And I used to enjoy those conversations, and talking about just the very nature of learning itself was really exciting. And I went off to university to study maths, and it was hard. It was really hard, and you needed people around you in those maths lectures to sort of decipher afterwards what was the nuance behind certain things that were being talked about. And in the last year, preparing for finals, a group of us all got together and wanted to talk about what we were learning. And we started teaching large groups. There were groups of us there. We were teaching, and I just loved it, absolutely loved it, and thought teaching sounds great. Going into teaching, though, of course, is at the time when you're a young person, it doesn't sort of sound terribly sexy when you say to people that you might consider going into teaching. And I had sort of told people that I was going to go into merchant banking because it sounded interesting. And it was one of those things to easily say in a conversation to, aunties, uncles, and other people, what are you going to do? But when it came to that moment of thinking about what to do next, doing the PGCE sounded really exciting. And I thought, yeah, this is great. I kept reflecting back on what learning meant for me. I kept thinking about what learning was like at my school, and organizationally, how could it have been better? How could it have been with teachers talking to young people, inspiring young people? I felt I had those skills. And when I then started my PGCE, I just absolutely adored it. So, and here I am now.
Fantastic. I love that you listen to your intuition despite what society was trying to tell you around you. Similar experience for me. I did an economics degree and it was always sort of just assumed that I'd go into the city. Yeah. And I felt quite strongly that wasn't what I wanted to do and forged my own way. But yeah, it is intuition that often guides us at those key moments, isn't it? The next question is actually about stepping up into leadership and thinking about strategy and how you develop that strategic mindset as you work through your career. And actually the thing that occurs to me as I'm asking that question is whether there's a link in your mind between the mathematics, which is very understanding a system, understanding sort of systems thinking, how all these things fit together. And I just wondered, do you think there's any similarity there between the skill set that you were developing through that maths education and then what you then needed to employ later on in your teaching career as you stepped up into leadership, into having that more strategic mindset? Is there any commonality, any common ground there, do you think?
I think I was lucky with learning mathematics, that it gave me the opportunity to learn computer programming. And when I started teaching in the math department, we were a very analytical department. And so we looked at the results of assessments that were being done by the students in my school, and we really thrived off each other. It was a very inspiring department to work in, and there was one chap in particular that did amazing things with computer programming and macros in Excel. And I think that getting into that sort of data side of teaching and learning was exciting. Having to organize schemes of work and planning out schemes of work. I had a responsibility for year 7, and planning and sitting down and finding time and planning what you want to deliver and how you want others to interpret what you want, what you think might be some good ideas. Of course, it was a little bit top down. Here I was sort of suggesting to people what topics and what order they should be teaching things. But that insight at the beginning, that gave me an idea about how to develop things strategically. But I think that in education, back in 2000, at that time, the idea of developing strategic thinking was probably new-ish. Certainly, PD is not like how it is now. And you very much learn on the job. And I think you learn the hard way. And you learn the hard way by trying to find time, trying to carve out time. And when you have a responsibility in a school, inevitably what happens is that if you're a teacher, one thing could potentially suffer. Either your teaching suffers or the responsibility that you've taken on can suffer. And the only way to make it work is by finding time. And I discovered very much the hard way how to properly prioritize things, how to strategize during the normal running course of the school day, school term, was not the best way to think about prioritizing and thinking ahead. It had to be holiday time. Yeah. And so trying to find that self-discipline to sit down and do that sort of thinking in holiday time can be quite hard. So that was a very long answer to what was a very short question.
No, it's really interesting, isn't it? That I think things have changed and the importance of strategic thinking in school leadership has become more apparent in more recent years. But the heads currently, and I would say probably most of the senior leadership team level currently, have come through their career at a time when there isn't a lot of professional development opportunity around this. So it is about each individual figuring out what it's about, what works for them, and then hopefully sharing with those around them. But rather than there being someone else who's ever going to carve out that time for you, it is about carving out that time. And actually, so many people talk about the holidays as being when they have the headspace to think strategically, which is interesting for me because actually I absolutely understand that. And I think that you can be strategic in the moment in a way that you don't want to turn off that ability during term, because that's one of your coping mechanisms basically during term, to prioritize effectively as you go from day to day as well. So when you're thinking about the the headships that you've had and your experience leading schools, what kind of approach has either St Julian's currently or you as a head, as you've moved from place to place, what kind of approach have you had to strategy? How have you gone about developing and implementing strategy?
So starting last academic year here at St Julian's, there was a strategic plan that had come to an end. And so the question was, how are we going to, as a leadership team, how are we going to now implement the next iteration of the strategic plan? And I was worried that how was I going to be able to find the time? How was I going to be able to find quality time in order to be able to launch a strategic plan partway through the year, at the start of the year? And so I thought the best way to do would be to talk to the leadership team and to set some priorities. What are my priorities? Well, as a head, inevitably, my first priority was to make sure that I understood what makes St. Julian's tick. And that was important. And making sure that we focus absolutely, coming out of that COVID year, making sure that we restore that sort of sense of community, that sort of the fellowship, collegiality between colleagues and so on. But then also thinking about, let's just focus on the teaching and learning and well-being. Let's not get distracted by a new initiative or a new idea. Let's just get back to our core purpose. And so I, with the leadership team, said, okay, I'm going to set out some priorities. You can challenge me on the priorities that I'm thinking of. But I think what would be really good is that when we meet with all the new staff at the start of the year, that we all share our individual priorities. So as a leadership group with people with different portfolios of responsibility, they all shared 3 or 4 priorities that they would be looking at. So when we met as a whole staff, by the time we had met with middle leaders and so on, we had what was a very succinct set of priorities for the year. And that was a good starting point. And then in about February time, we started to sort of think about how are we going to structure what our strategic plan is going to look like. And I think it's really important, and it's a really reassuring signal to members of staff in the school that I said, okay, let's go back to what the structure and the layout of the previous strategic plan was, and let's just modify it. Let's not create anything new. There might sometimes be a temptation to completely rethink something, but no, I wanted to use the same terminology, and we set out our main objectives, which was pretty much in line with what had happened to the previous plan. But the one overriding change that we put, and that was that we put well-being for students and well-being for staff as the overarching pillar, as the main objective. And then that allowed us to develop the plan. And when we launched it at the end of last academic year, again, it sort of, people just felt, well, this looks very familiar. And that gave some reassurance that it was nothing sort of brand new, and I think, or too different. And I think that that's what we want to hear as human beings. We want to feel that we're in control. And with busy school lives, we don't want to have too many things being thrown at us. So if things look the same or similar, that gives us some reassurance. Of course, it's not entirely the same, but it's a step we're moving in a slightly different direction, but the familiarity was there. And I think that was a positive signal for staff to get.
Absolutely. And one thing that I would reflect on is that if things are going well, let's not change lots of things simultaneously. If you're coming into a school as a new head, the temptation to change things quickly is there. But unless things are not going well for some reason, and unless, the governors have brought you in as, an agent of change, and significant change over a short period of time is needed, which sometimes is the case, and that has its place. But unless that is the case, often the smallest tweaks of emphasis can actually chart a course in a slightly different direction. I think that's what you described there with putting well-being as being the central kind of umbrella under which everything else sits, and defining that well-being as being for pupils and for staff, which may well have been there, but often we prioritize one over the other. Often pupil well-being gets kind of put central, and just these tiny shifts in emphasis as you say, give people the consistency, but also mean that you're not resting on your laurels, that we can just stick with the status quo for the next 10 years and that's going to be fine. But it's about managing the pace of change. And also, and this is not a comment about St. Julian's, but just more generally, it means that if there is something else that you want to be changing, maybe in year 2 or year 3 of a headship, maybe there's something to do with the business model or to do with the marketing or something like that, then you've kept a bit of currency, if you like, that's where you can make a big change that may be needed in the near future because people are feeling confident that there's a consistent foundation present. Does any of that resonate? Have I articulated that in a similar way to the way you were thinking about it?
It's absolutely true. It's the way I sort of see it. It's really important to make sure that people see that change isn't too drastic, and the familiarity of seeing things, and when people are processing things which are being presented to them, I keep thinking that as a teacher in that room, having something being presented to them, sometimes, you would like to think that everybody was focused 100% on everything that was being said by the presenter. But that's not always the case. If you're a busy teacher, you might be sort of just thinking about, I need to think carefully about the next lesson I've got to the next day or something like that. So by having something that looks familiar, you're reducing the amount of processing time that somebody's going to have to do when they're taking in this new information. So hopefully they were absolutely hearing the headlines, but and thinking about what was being said and not having to process too much other stuff about, this looks very new. What am I having to think here? It's a challenge. And that's what I think was important about presenting something that felt and looked familiar.
Absolutely. It's also the driving force behind simplicity being really effective in all things, but in strategy as well. And that sense that sometimes there's a tendency that to make it look like we've done a lot of strategic thinking, there's a sense of this needs to be complicated. In actual fact, it's the opposite. You put a lot of strategic thinking into making something really simple so that you can communicate it with impact. And it's really clear what you want people to do with that information. So we know that whenever we're delivering a strategic plan, we're trying to involve people and empower people across the school to deliver the areas that they're really wanting to take charge of, and the areas that they really, really feel passionate about in their teaching, in their support work and so on. What techniques have you seen work well when we're thinking about delegating effectively and empowering others to really take forward a strategy as a whole school rather than just a head trying to drive change themselves?
I was really lucky when I came to St. Julian's because my predecessor had set up a leadership team, which was exactly the same way I would have set the leadership team up if I had a choice. And that was by creating people in the school here at St. Julian's, we have a bilingual section, which is Portuguese English section. And that has a principal. We have a principal for the secondary section, a principal for the primary section. So those people are on the whole school leadership team. But in addition to that, I've got the bursar, I've got the director of technology, I've got the director of staff development, and I've got the director of student support. So as a group, we have the whole school covered there in terms of what are the really important threads going through a school. And when we put together the strategic plan, each of the strategic objectives that sat under the 3 pillars of well-being, teaching and learning, and organization for learning, I assigned each of the strategic objectives to members of the team around that table. And what we decided to do is we would call those people accountability leads. Mm-hmm. And as accountability leads, they would need to make sure that each of the actions that sat under each of those objectives were properly timed, had proper teams, that there was leadership of those teams, that those teams would be reporting back to the accountability leads. And by encouraging and having a monthly reporting process, so we've just gone through our first cycle as a leadership team where we've started to report back now on the strategic objectives. It's been really useful that the accountability leads have been able to get information from each of the people responsible for those actions that they can come back and give honest accounts of the progress of each of those actions leading to the overall strategic objective. And that's working well because the strategic objectives, most of them are sitting very naturally under each of the portfolios of people sat around the leadership table. So it's what people would hopefully be doing as part of their job anyhow, but in a much more strategic focus as well.
Yeah, so you've got a real clear connection then with a cascade down from overall strategic objectives through to individuals who are overseeing those areas. As you say, a lot of strategy is about doing the day job really, really well, not about creating new, exciting, extra things. And then that cascading down through those accountability leads into actions, which individuals across the school can then take kind of responsibility for. And then the information can then flow back up through the system so that as a head, you have a sense of where things are going well, you're feeling very comfortable, very happy, where things might need a little bit of additional support and help and guidance, but without needing to know all of the detail and getting really bogged down into what's happening on the ground for every single project. Fantastic. We're also working in a really rapidly changing environment. So we're seeing the external environment in which we're operating changing. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche to say it's faster than it's ever been. I'm not actually sure that that's strictly true, but it's changing quickly. And so we need to think about, as leaders, how we're building a culture that really embraces that change and encourages innovation and encourages openness to new ideas while staying focused on a clear, shared strategic direction. Do you have any thoughts on how leaders can build that culture which is open to change?
I think being open to change, what you need to make sure that's in place first is that people feel in control. And what we can often do in schools is that we get an email sent to us by an organization that might say, would you like to be part of this study? Would you like to be part of this project? And we have a tendency sometimes in schools to take those on board straight away, almost ask no questions about where the capacity, where the time can be found, but somehow we just take them on and we do them. And I think that there's a danger sometimes in schools of taking on too many new initiatives. And part of our thinking with the strategic plan was we wanted to force leadership, middle leaders to really just focus on what was in the strategic plan. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that we're not responsive to change. It means that we have to be very critical and we have to ask very good questions about why we think we should make a change, why we should add something else onto what we're already doing. And I would always put that back to leadership. And I would say, okay, sometimes we're just going to have to say no. It might sound wonderful to do that, but actually what's going to be the impact? Well, the impact is that something is going to have to suffer. Something is going to have to change, or we're going to have to change priorities somewhere, which is going to require a lot of thinking, a lot of planning. Mm-hmm. And so what I really hope that we can do over the next couple of years with our current strategic plan is give ourselves a strong basis, give ourselves also some breathing space, some quality time where we can evaluate new things that might come our way or think strategically about how to respond to something that is requiring a change. But by properly prioritizing and focusing just on what we've got here in our strategic plan at the moment, I think for us here is probably going to pay dividends in the future. Let's get this, everything around us now, organized the way that we want it. And then we can be responsive to things that might come our way, other changes. Because inevitably every day there are all sorts of things that come our way that we have to suddenly change a direction or refocus on something else. We anticipate that we might have to do a internet safety week in February, but if something happens in the school community that means you have to bring that forward, wow, that requires some thinking and some, what are the consequences of doing that now? So I would say that change is always happening, but actually proper concrete planning is really, really important, and not deviating too much. Otherwise we end up spreading ourselves far too thinly. And then that's not for the good of the community, the school community, the children, the parents, the staff are looking to leadership to give a structured way of going forward. And if we start to spread ourselves too thinly, then we're doing a disservice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think in a way, actually, one of the ways that you can define strategies, it gives you a filter to decide what you are going to do and what you're not going to do. And then it gives you a rationale for saying no to something, and the importance of having clarity in your strategy, which enables you to say no, is often underrated. Often people think about it as being, these are all the new things we want to do. We want to say yes to all of these exciting new things. But actually the way that you've described it there is providing a logical filter for analysing these new opportunities. And there may well be some that you say yes to, and that's great, but that will only happen when those things have passed through that filter, that strategy, the strategic direction that you've set, which means that the resources, the scarce resources that you all have as a school, and that'll be financial and time, and sometimes things like land and space and so on as well, are really allocated to things that are going to make a difference, rather than, as you described it, spreading things very thinly. Really, really critical to have that filter. So really important. Thank you. We know, and you've touched on it before, that the importance of carving out time, the importance of involving and empowering others. We know that leadership in schools is not easy. It's not straightforward. And I wondered if you had any practical tips for either leaders now or aspiring leaders on managing and juggling daily priorities and the demands on their time whilst retaining that sense of a strategic focus. What would you say to a leader that's aspiring to headship?
Trying to find time where you can have quality thinking time is really, really important. And trying to find the time where you've got all these ideas bouncing around in your head, but you want to put them together. You want to try and get some cohesion between what you've got in front of you. So I would say that there are two really important things which I really value. Number one, a coach. I think having a coach is wonderful, because you're talking to somebody who you can bounce ideas off, who can, using coaching techniques, sort of really get the best out of you. Yeah. And in a way that probably a good friend or a partner won't ever be able to do. And that's really powerful.
Yeah.
But in a very practical way, the best thing I've ever learned is if you've got somebody helping you with your calendar, and I'm very lucky, I've got a great PA, and we now have a process where we try to keep Mondays clear as much as possible. Of course, that doesn't happen. I've still got meetings in my calendar. But if I know over the weekend that I'm not going to have a crazy Monday, it just feels better. It just feels that inevitably, I think most school leaders are going to be doing some thinking, working, planning over the weekend. But to know that you're not going to go into a crazy Monday helps. I really find that useful. So it sort of sets the tone. You already feel good about getting up on that Monday morning. You don't feel that you're going to be sort of suddenly things coming at you at 120 miles an hour. And then also it's quite nice to be able to have a Friday as well without big blocks of time being taken away. So it gives you an opportunity to make sure that you can wrap up the week really nicely, that you can plan the week ahead of you coming up, and also to be able to get out and about. That's really important as well. And just making sure that you get to the end of the week and seeing people is really important. So I find that trying to put as many things into the middle 3 days is, I think, a better way, because you can then end up with the beginning and the end of the week where you can have hopefully some thinking time to organize your things. And one really important thing I have found is that it was very easy sometimes to go from meeting to meeting, and having time which in your calendar, we all use Google Calendars here at St. Julian's, and it's very easy for people to see, oh, that person's free between here and here. And people will just can fill up each other's times. And that's not great. If you're going from one thing to another thing without being able to just summarize what I need to do, what are my key actions that I've got to do, what are my key reflections on this now? If you don't create some sort of travel time, then you can get caught out. And so I would say build that travel time. You can't go from meeting to meeting. It doesn't work. It's unfair to the next group of people that you're going to. So those would be my two time management suggestions.
What I love is that you've just said things that I already do and I've discovered over time as well. So definitely the coach side of thing, absolutely fully committed to the power of that. On the time management side, there's something about having a Monday and a Friday, which, as you've said, inevitably, and actually I'm feeling very conscious because people might not know this, but we're recording this on a Friday. So I've kind of invaded your Friday, but having a slightly lighter Monday and Friday does give breathing space at the beginning and end of the week, and having, I call them buffers, but between meetings. And I don't know about you, but the mindset shift that enabled me to do that was, this is what allows me to do my best work. So everybody I meet gets the best of me. And that's what you've just said as well, that actually this isn't about protecting you as a leader, although it does do that. It's actually just as much about delivering the best of you to everybody that you're working alongside. Has there been a mindset shift similar to that for you? Or maybe it was easier for you to see that much earlier than I did?
Yeah, I think I found, again, I discovered it the hard way. I couldn't work out how to find time. And it seemed a bit bizarre that there I was in Amsterdam, I was called the principal there. And there I was, the principal. I should be able to control that time. I should be able to find a way. And so just making it happen and not caving into, oh, look, okay, I know that I'm free on Monday. Just pop in and we'll get it sorted then. Just saying, no, okay, well, we won't be able to do it now until Tuesday, and just really making that you've got to be the one that will make it happen. And I think that, yes, by discovering it the hard way was how it happened.
And that was the same for me as well. And it role models it for others as well, though, doesn't it? That sense of, and because you've mentioned staff wellbeing as being a central element of your strategy, role modeling that we don't need to be sort of spontaneously, emotionally almost driven to respond to every email every moment of the day, or respond to every request that comes in, or meeting requests and so on. Having that sense of role modeling from the top can also shift culture, I think. Yeah, fantastic. It has been absolutely delightful to spend this time with you, Paul. Thank you so much. I love that we've spanned all the way from your love of maths through thinking about how that informs strategic development, and strategic thinking through the analytical and data side of where you felt really comfortable in your early career, all the way through that sense of the cascade of the strategy running down the school and the way you've put that in place in this new headship that you have, and then thinking about the balance between protecting your time and doing your best work, and the fact that these are two of the same things, that it is a sense of when you carve out time to think, you are able to do your best strategic work, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for spending the time here with us today, Paul.
Thanks very much, Juliet.